The chamber smelled like antiseptic and ozone. Not exactly either one, but something close enough to both that my body understood instantly that I was far from home. The gravity was wrong too. Not enough to throw off my balance, just enough to rest a quiet pressure across my shoulders, like the room itself wanted me to remember I did not belong there. I stood alone in the upper observation ring of the Galactic Council's Grand Convocation Hall, the only human in a space built for 600 delegates from 41 recognized civilizations. Below me, the session was entering its final hour. I had been sent as a witness, not a participant. Not a speaker. Not a voice. The briefing packet had repeated that distinction 3 separate times, as if they feared humans might mistake silence for a temporary inconvenience. My name is Yara Vasquez. I was 34 years old, a commander in the Earth Diplomatic Defense Corps, which was a polished name for the branch of our military trained to smile in rooms where people decided whether we counted. I spoke 6 languages, 4 of them human. I had spent 6 years posted to deep space liaison assignments, eating food that tasted like compacted paper, sleeping in gravity fields that left my spine aching, and learning to read the body language of species that communicated through color, vibration, temperature shifts, and tones too low for unaided human hearing. I was qualified. I was prepared. None of it mattered. Because that day, the Council was voting on humanity's taxonomic status under the Interstellar Sentience Accord. They called it a protection framework. Above Tier 3, a civilization received legal personhood, sovereign territorial rights, and formal protection from commercial exploitation. Earth had applied for Tier 3 recognition 4 years earlier. The review had taken 3.5 years longer than any comparable case in Council history. I kept my hands folded in front of me and stared at them because they were the only familiar thing in the room. There was a raised scar on the knuckle of my right index finger from when I was 9 and fell off a chain-link fence in El Paso. A smaller, cleaner scar crossed my left index finger from Diego's pocket knife. He had been teaching me how to whittle. I had been terrible at it. He laughed so hard when I slipped that he dropped the knife and somehow I was the one who got cut. He gave me that knife the morning before the Kepler displacement. So I looked at my hands. Below me, Delegate Morin of the Solon Compact was finishing a speech about developmental thresholds and cognitive ceilings. His species spoke primarily in controlled waves of bioluminescence across their torsos, but my earpiece translated his remarks into calm, emotionless English. He had been speaking for 40 minutes. His argument, stripped bare, was simple enough to be insulting. Humanity, he said, possessed reactive intelligence rather than generative sapience. Reactive intelligence meant solving problems placed in front of you. Generative sapience meant creating problems worthy of solving. Only the latter, in his framework, justified full legal recognition. I had written 3 doctrinal rebuttals to that exact argument over the previous 2 years. None had entered the record. Witnesses do not submit documents. Witnesses observe. So I stood still while 41 civilizations voted on whether my species was a people or a resource. The result came without ceremony. No dramatic hush. No final pause for moral weight. One by one the delegates registered their positions through the chamber's biological interface. Fin against sensor. Color pulse into receptor. Directed sound burst into receiver. Above the chamber floor, the tally assembled itself in cold light. 37 in favor. The resolution passed. Humanity was formally classified as Tier 4, conditional sapience. Tier 4 meant useful but not entitled. It meant intelligent enough to work, not important enough to own ourselves. It meant the harvest licensing framework, an elegant phrase for the treaty structure that allowed commercial extraction of labor, biological material, and territorial resources from non-protected species, now applied fully to humans. It meant Diego had not been an accident. It meant Diego had been practice. I did not move. I stood in that wrong-smelling air and that wrong gravity and kept still the way my abuela had taught me to keep still when something powerful in the room wanted to watch me break. Then the FCI delegate rose to deliver the formal declaration. His name was Prius. 7 feet tall, with deep violet ridges running along his neck, he carried the kind of physical authority his species had used for millennia to end arguments before they began. He was the architect of the Tier 4 resolution. I had seen his name so often on briefing files it had stopped feeling like a name and started feeling like a sound made by a door closing. He delivered the statement in Old GA. Old GA was the ceremonial language of the Council's founding species. It was not taught to observers. It was not considered necessary for humans to know. The Council liked that arrangement. It allowed certain truths to be said inside the room without ever becoming part of the official record. I had been studying Old GA for 6 years. So when Priya said in the language he thought was private, the animals are now formally catalogued. We may proceed with harvest licensing review. I understood every word. The delegate beside him, from a pale aquatic civilization in the Vea Shoals, made a soft sound the translator did not catch. A private sound. A colleague's sound. The kind people make after finishing a tedious administrative task. I looked down at my hands again. The calluses at the base of my fingers. The 2 scars. Then I thought of Diego. 22 years old. Dark-eyed. Stupid jokes. A laugh so bright strangers turned around in restaurants just to see who was making that much joy in public. He had been sent to Kepler Station under the Council's Humanitarian Development Initiative, which was another polished name. It meant labor transfer. It meant human bodies moved into Council infrastructure projects under agreements dressed in the language of progress. The paperwork called his posting voluntary. I knew because I had held the documents myself. The word voluntary appeared 14 times. I said nothing in that chamber. I did not translate what Priya's had said for the record. I did not move until the session formally ended and the ceremonial lights shifted from gold to standard white. Then I turned and walked out. The corridor beyond the hall curved away in a long silent arc. The floor absorbed sound so completely that my footsteps vanished the instant they left my boots. I walked its full length inside a silence so clean it felt manufactured. Animals. I turned the word over slowly, the way you turn a stone to see what lives underneath. My abuela had a phrase she used for men with power who said foolish things with confidence. She would listen. She would nod. And then, in a voice fit equally for prayer and for warning, she would say, "Bless their hearts." It was the most dangerous sentence she knew. At the end of the corridor, I took out my personal comm, opened an encrypted channel to Earth Defense Corps Joint Command and sent one message. They passed Tier 4 unanimous proceed with withdrawal plan on my mark. 14 words. No punctuation. No explanation. Then I put the comm away and looked at my hands one more time. The scar from Diego's knife. The scar from the fence in El Paso. Both earned. Both mine. Bless their hearts. The withdrawal did not look like a withdrawal. That was deliberate. It looked like delays. Contract expirations. Scheduling friction. Staffing shortfalls. Administrative misalignment across 14 star systems with communications lag ranging from a few hours to several days. It looked like what interstellar bureaucracy always looked like when nobody important was paying close attention. The Council did not notice for 11 days. By then I was aboard the deep-range transport carrier Innis Cavalry, sitting at a narrow desk in my quarters, drinking real coffee, beans from Karnataka, ground that morning, pressed by hand in the brewer I carried everywhere, and reading the first internal disruption reports through a monitoring arrangement that was technically legal and practically invisible. The Karanath shipyards had experienced an abrupt suspension in structural welding operations. That was how the report phrased it. The reality was simpler. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The human welders who ran it were gone. The Karanath assembly lines built long-haul cargo frames for the Council's fleet expansion program. Other species possessed the strength to operate the systems. Some had the visual acuity. A few had the patience. But none had spent 2 generations mastering the exact blend of heat control, 3-dimensional spatial reasoning, and improvisational correction that the work required. The shipyard had been built around human hands because human hands were, by a margin nobody had bothered to officially study, the best hands in known space for that particular labor. Projected impact: 412 days of delay. I drank my coffee. 3 days later the Mavio Agricultural Belt filed its own distress report. 17 human irrigation engineers had completed their rotation and declined renewal. The growing region functioned on a 46-day cycle dependent on constant recalibration across terrain affected by the tidal stress of 3 moons. A human field engineer could rebalance the system in 2 hours, working partly from math and partly from instinct, the same way a good cook knows a pan's heat before touching it. The automated systems the Council deployed in their place were, according to the report's painfully diplomatic wording, performing suboptimally. 17 of 46 grow plots were already under stress. Then came the Y Medical Station network. 11 human surgical specialists gone. Human fine motor control, tactile sensitivity, and neurological feedback loops had already been documented in 12 peer-reviewed Council studies as uniquely effective for microsurgery in unstable live conditions. Machines were better in sterile predictability. Humans were better in living chaos. The surgical waitlist was growing. I made a second cup of coffee. Then my secure comms signaled an incoming request routed through 3 anonymizing relays. Someone was trying very hard to talk to me without letting anyone know. The identifier resolved to Priya's personal administrative office. I accepted. His hologram appeared above my desk, washed in council blue. At that scale he looked smaller, more mortal. For the first time I noticed that the violet ridges at his neck had faded nearly pale. I had read enough Sci physiology to know what that meant. Stress. He spoke in unified GA, the official language. Commander Vasquez. Thank you for accepting my communication. Of course, subdelegate. There was a pause while he arranged himself into diplomacy. There have been unexpected operational difficulties in several integrated council systems, he said. We are assessing contributing factors, and it has been suggested that recent adjustments in human labor rotations may be connected. That sounds significant, I said. It is developing. Another pause. We believe elements of the recent classification review may have been handled without sufficient consideration of the full operational context. I let that sentence sit between us long enough to become embarrassing. Then I answered in old GA. Clear. Slow. Deliberate. My brother's name was Diego Vasquez. He was 22 years old. He was assigned to Kepler Station under your Humanitarian Development Initiative during the third year of the classification review. He arrived on a council transport under council supervision. He is not there now. He is nowhere now. Priya's went very still. I need you to write his name down, I said. Full name. Assignment. Date of arrival. Date your records list his file as closed. Commander. Write it down. Before anything else. Enter his name into your official administrative log for this communication. The silence that followed had weight to it. Not the silence of superiority. The silence of a large confident structure feeling its footing shift. Then he wrote the name down. I watched him do it. Thank you, I said and ended the call. Afterward I sat with my empty cup and stared out the small viewport at the dark between stars, which is never truly dark if you know how to look. There are always lights there if you wait long enough for your eyes to adjust. My abuela told me that in the Chihuahuan desert once, when our car broke down at 2 in the morning and I was 7 and frightened by the size of the sky. She pointed upward and said, Mija, the light was always there. Your eyes just needed time. I thought about that while the council filed more incident reports. Then I thought about animals. There is something people need to understand about animals. Especially the ones that survive. The council sent its arbitration fleet on day 31. I will give them this much. It was beautiful. 3 carrier formations. Recursive hull geometries designed to disperse impact through nonlinear stress channels. Weapons arrays calibrated for simultaneous multi-vector engagement. Communication systems capable of coherent battlefield control across a combat sphere 3 light minutes wide. The sky had a word for this class of force, Rethavel. The thing that ends arguments. I stood in the tactical planning room aboard the cavalry, looking at the projected approach vectors on the main display and absently rolling and unrolling a real paper map of the Kepler transit corridor because my hands needed something to do. My name is Yara Vasquez, and I come from women who did not wait for ideal conditions before they fought. My mother grew up in a neighborhood where the power failed 3 times every winter. My grandmother crossed the desert with 2 children and $40. And before them were people whose names I do not know, but whose refusal to yield sits inside my bones. We were never a family that fought from strength. We fought from whatever position we were already in. That mattered because the Council's entire military doctrine rested on a single assumption. Conflict is visible, declared, and symmetrical. You mass your force. The other side masses theirs. They meet. The larger, cleaner, better-equipped force wins. It had worked for 2,000 years. It had worked because every civilization the Council had ever fought had evolved from apex predators. Species that grew up at the top of their food chains do not think like prey. They do not build their reflexes around vulnerability. They confront. They dominate. They assume conflict announces itself. Humans did not evolve that way. For most of our history we were mid-range omnivores, slower than many things that could kill us, weaker than many things that hunted us, without claws, venom, armor, or spectacular senses. What we had instead was pattern recognition and a very old problem. How do you survive when something bigger, faster, and stronger wants to eat you? You do not outrun it. You do not meet it head-on. You learn how it thinks, where it moves, what it ignores, what terrain it dislikes, how long it stays confident, where its certainty becomes a blind spot. Then you change the world around it. You place the trap where its own confidence will carry it. That is not cowardice. That is heritage. Every human military doctrine from sharpened sticks to deep space tactics is in one form or another, built on the same rule. Do not fight what is in front of you. Change what is in front of it. The Council's scout wing entered the Kepler corridor exactly on schedule. 6 fast vessels, lightly armed, intended for sensor sweeps and forward positioning. They never emerged. No debris. No distress signal. No explosion. The Council's observation stations at the corridor exit registered nothing. As far as their systems could tell, the corridor was empty. 6 ships had gone in. Nothing had come out. Fleet Command spent 4 hours and 40 minutes classifying the event as instrument error. We knew that because we had been listening to their command traffic the entire time. They recalibrated sensors, ran telemetry audits, queried both stations, requested delayed authorization from Relay Command. They held position. Then the second event happened. Their primary fuel processing support vessel reported an unscheduled maintenance shutdown. Not damage. Not sabotage technically. Maintenance. A microscopic fault reading in a component manufactured by a human engineering firm in Cape Town under a council supply contract. A component with a software interface that still responded to a service protocol our people had built into it 3 years earlier, back when keeping diagnostic access seemed like an ordinary practical decision. The fleet lost fuel processing capability for 11 hours. For those 11 hours, the thing that ends arguments could not move. I looked down at my paper map and made the small sound my abuela used to make when something went exactly according to plan. Not laughter. Not satisfaction. Just the quiet exhale of a burden settling where it was meant to go. This matters, so I will say it plainly. We were not trying to kill them. Every operation was built to disable, confuse, redirect, delay. Not destroy. I held that line carefully because I knew the moment we let go of it, we became something else. Not what the Council had called us. Not animals. Just people who had run out of patience in a cage somebody else built. By then the fleet was afraid. You could hear it in the command traffic. They had arrived expecting resistance in a shape they recognized. What they found instead was absence. Empty corridors. Lost scouts. Systems failing without visible cause. Danger with no face. That was the second gift. The first was time to doubt themselves. The second was never knowing where the threat was. The third, the one that did the deepest work, was the slow realization forming in the mind of the fleet commander that they were not hunting us. They never had been. We were hunting them. And we had started before they entered the system. By day 44, I was operating out of a repurposed mineral survey station on a cold moon in the outer Kepler reach. 14 months earlier it had been a council-contracted survey site built and run by human crews. Under the terms of those agreements, we had access codes, maintenance privileges, layout schematics, environmental control authority, and intimate knowledge of every structural weakness in the station systems. The council had never thought deeply about what that meant. People rarely do when they mistake maintenance workers for furniture. We converted 7 of 11 survey stations into forward operating positions in 19 days. Quietly. Efficiently. 100 forgettable steps, none dramatic enough to be noticed on its own. I had not slept more than 4 hours at a time in 3 weeks. I was exhausted. But it was the specific exhaustion of doing the thing you were built to do, the one that sharpens rather than blunts. I could hold the whole operational pattern in my head. Every movement. Every supply vector. Every corridor. Every timing window. The entire shape of it was visible to me even with my eyes closed, the way a familiar room remains visible in total darkness. By then the fleet was down to 1 carrier formation. The other 2 had withdrawn after successive logistics failures made sustained deployment impossible. Not destroyed. Not beaten in open combat. Merely rendered impractical. That was enough. The final formation held position near the Kepler station approach zone, waiting, I suspected, for orders Council Command did not know how to write, because no model in their strategic systems covered an enemy who refused to stand where war was supposed to happen. That was when Prius made his mistake. He left the carrier alone. Not officially. Not under escort. In a small diplomatic courier vessel with a crew of 4, traveling under personal authorization toward a neutral relay point in the outer system. I believe he meant to open a back channel. Unfortunately for him, we had been monitoring every vessel movement in the system for 3 weeks. I sent a 2-person retrieval team. They found the courier at the relay point. Systems normal. Crew anxious but unharmed. Priya's in the communications room looking like a man who had spent a long time deciding what kind of words should be waiting for him when the door opened. I did not go with the retrieval team. I met him later once the vessel arrived under escort. I have thought often about what I felt when that door opened and I finally stood in the same room as the person whose signature had helped turn Diego into administrative fallout. I had imagined rage. Instead, I got 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which I saw Diego at 22, laughing too loudly in restaurants. 3 seconds in which I felt the weight I had carried for 4 years settle into my chest. Then I put it away. Not because it wasn't real. Because there was work to do and the work mattered more than the feeling. What followed was the kind of anger my abuela would have recognized instantly. Not wildfire. Banked heat. The kind that lasts. Prius sat in the courier's small meeting compartment, his neck ridges gone almost completely pale. His translation earpiece lay on the table in front of him, removed as a gesture. No official filters. No institutional cushioning. I picked it up, turned it once in my fingers and set it down on my side of the table. You won't need this, I said in Old Ga. I'm going to speak clearly. I'm going to speak slowly. You are going to understand every word. He said nothing. We are not here to destroy the council, I told him. We are not here to take what isn't ours. We are here because you built a framework that turned human beings into assets, and then you used it. People are gone because of that framework. My brother is gone because of it. So now you and I are going to sit here and decide what happens next. He answered in Old GA2. His accent was flawless, which told me he had been listening to our language far longer than he ever admitted. What does happen next? I thought about it for a moment. Outside, the cold moon turned under a distant star. Then I said, you write down some names. Then we discussed the future. He wrote them down. He started with Diego. I watched him write each letter by hand in the notebook I set between us. That first session he wrote 13 names. There were more. I had a list. But 13 was a beginning. My hands stayed steady on the table. Both scars visible. Both mine. The negotiations lasted 31 days. They were not elegant. They were not clean. There were 14-hour sessions that accomplished nothing except to prove how exhausting intelligent stubborn people can be when they understand every argument and resist every consequence. There were arguments over subclauses so microscopic they felt insulting in the shadow of what had happened. There were nights at 2 in the morning when I sat alone in my quarters making coffee slowly, inhaling the only honest smell on that station, and wondered what else might still go wrong. History when it gets written later like smoothness. Truth does not. The final terms mattered. The Tier 4 classification was revoked in full. Humanity was reclassified under the Interstellar Sentience Accord as Tier 1, full recognized sapience, with unrestricted legal personhood and sovereign territorial control over all Earth origin settlements and established human operational zones. The harvest licensing framework was dissolved as it applied to human labor, human biological material, and human resources. Every contract issued under that doctrine became void. The legal architecture that had made Diego's assignment possible, that had made 14 uses of the word voluntary possible, was struck from active council policy. Restitution took 9 days to finalize. The council's own records were, unfortunately for them, meticulous enough to prove what they had done. I came into those negotiations with 104 names, people transferred through the Humanitarian Development Initiative whose files ended in disappearance, closure, or administrative erasure. Each name entered the official record. Each one acknowledged as a person. Not a file. Not a labor incident. Not a Tier 4 complication. A person with a name, an age, and a last known assignment. Diego was first. On the 31st day in the largest operational bay of our station, with our gravity, our air and coffee in the room because I insisted on it, the final document was prepared for signature. 47 pages. I had read every one of them 11 times. Then I asked for a pen. The council legal officer, a careful Solon delegate named Veth, blinked polite confusion at me and said, "The signature protocol uses biological authentication. A physical instrument is not required." "I know," I said. "I want a pen." There was a pause. A human station worker reached into his jacket pocket and handed one over. Plain black. Chip. The kind that lives at the bottom of drawers and bags all over Earth. He gave me a look that said he understood exactly why I had asked. I took the pen and sat with it for a moment. Across from me Priaz waited. Over the previous month he had regained his composure. I respected that. He was not simple. Not stupid. Not some cartoon of cruelty. He was a person shaped by a system that made certain conclusions easy and certain questions unnecessary. And when the questions could no longer be avoided, he had stayed in the room and answered them. That did not absolve him. But it mattered. I opened the document. "Before I sign," I said, I am entering the following names into the official audio record of this session. No one objected, so I read them. All 104. First and last name. Age at last documented council contact. Final known assignment. Not alphabetical. Not chronological. Personal. Diego first. Then the others whose families I had spoken to, whose files I had tracked through years of work, whose disappearances the council had hidden behind paperwork and language and distance. It took 22 minutes. No one moved while I read. When I finished, the room was silent. I signed the document with the pen. Then I pressed my hand to the biological authentication panel. 2 systems. 2 validations. The old way and the official way. Both accepted. I slipped the pen into the breast pocket of my jacket. The council legal officer cleared his throat softly and said, "The pen is mine." "It is now," I said. He nodded. "Fair enough." The session ended. People began the organized dispersal formal proceedings always produce. Documents gathered, low voices exchanged, small administrative rituals performed in the shadow of something larger. I stayed seated until most of the room had cleared, then stood, straightened my jacket and walked toward the exit. Veth, the Solon legal officer, was waiting there. He had a kind of stillness I had come to recognize over the previous month as his way of wanting to say something important. A muted amber pattern ran along his left forearm. "I have submitted," he said, "independently of this agreement, a formal petition to the Council Historical Accuracy Committee regarding the Kepler displacement and 3 comparable initiatives. It will take years," he added. "I know," I said. "But the record should be complete." "Yes," he said. "It should." I walked out. The corridor hummed with the station's ordinary air systems. Overhead lights cast that thin operational blue-white spectrum nobody ever bothers warming in places built only for work. I followed the corridor all the way to the observation port at the far end. The Kepler star burned there in the distance, warm and yellow. The sort of star old Earth catalogs once labeled sun-like. The sort of star early life surveys circled hopefully. Diego had been under that star. I stood there a long time. I thought about my abuela beside a dead car in the desert, telling a frightened little girl that the light had always been there and only needed time to be seen. I thought about Diego's laugh. I thought about what he would have said about all of it, the impossible, exhausting 31-day negotiation on a frozen moon that ended with coffee in the air and a stolen pen in my pocket. He would have said something so perfectly funny I would have hated him for making me laugh at the wrong moment. I did not laugh, but I smiled. A small private smile with my forehead close to the cold glass, the Kepler star burning quietly beyond it. The pen was in my pocket. The names were in the record. The document was signed. We had not been waiting to be recognized. We had never been waiting for permission to be people. We had only been waiting to see whether they would force us to prove it. They did. So we did. And now that proof lived in 47 pages of law stored in a council archive that would outlast everyone in that room. I put my hand flat against the glass. Both scars visible. The one from the fence in El Paso. The one from Diego's knife. I left it there until the cold moved through my palm and into my wrist and up my arm, sharp, clean, undeniable. Then I pushed away from the window, turned, and walked back down the corridor toward operations. There was work to do. There is always work to do. The next thing was already waiting, patient as ever. The pen stayed in my pocket. It was coming home with me.